Okay. Hi, Chris. From one
How's it
side of the
going?
world to the other,
Good
from
morning
Australia.
from slightly grey springtime Dublin in Ireland.
So good to chat with you, as always. I love our conversations. And remind me, where did we meet? How did we meet? It was probably about a year
Yeah.
ago, was it?
Maybe, yeah. Whenever you were on Dart's podcast with Vic, I was enchanted and felt like I had found some kind of kindred spirits. So I found your website and filled out your contact us form, and we went from there.
Very kind of you. It often does bring together the best people and really that common language around work as a product and how can we improve the work experience for everyone, by taking advantage of all of the wonderful new developments and so on, but also, figuring out what's best for people as well as companies. So there was a lot of common ground there. I remember
Yeah.
our very first conversation. And I wanted to ask you just to give a quick background or introduction as to what do you do?
Yeah,
Why do you do it?
sure.
Where did you come from?
Yeah, so my name's Chris. If you're trying to place my very weird accent, learn to speak English in New Zealand, where I was born, but I've spent the last kind of 20 years living in Europe and Dublin and London and working in the States as well. So kind of don't know where my accent is the center of gravity. But I basically, my whole career is kind of 20 years in product in and around HR. Kind of most notably, had nearly a decade at Workday. I was leading the teams who were based in Europe for the Workday core HCM product. And so when I left, that was about 40% of Workday's subscription revenue. So kind of a big revenue generator for the company, and a phenomenal experience to be a very small part of what is a very big leadership team there. And I led the product and design teams at an Italian company called Docebo, who make learning management software. I was also head of product at Primark, who are a big retailer in this part of the world. And I have a company that I run called Red Oak, and we focus on helping HR leaders through coaching, through product transformation, and we offer some learning programs as well. So really kind of sitting at the intersection of product and technology and people and transformation. I guess I kind of think of myself primarily as a product person, not an HR person first, kind of
Yeah.
bringing a bit of a outsider perspective on that.
Yeah. And really for me, you're known and what you're famous for is people experience or PX as a product and really helping HR leaders think differently about how they can build and I guess redesign their function to be future fit,
Yes.
bringing that product lens. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So this is careful because I will speak for 3 hours nonstop on this
Three
topic. So
minutes.
you'll 3 minutes. You'll have to rein me in. So what do we mean by people experience as a product? I think basically you mentioned Dart, you mentioned work as a product, you mentioned the kind of product mindset. That's really the kind of position I come from. A product is something that helps someone make progress in their life or helps them solve a problem. And a problem can be something like pains. If you have a headache, you take paracetamol, painkiller. Need, if you're hungry, you go out for food or you buy some food. Or desire. So desire might be something that you solve with like ice cream or Disneyland, right? And so pains, needs, and desires are ultimately what a product is responding to. And when we think about building products, we're starting from a deep understanding of the pain and the need and the desire that the person who we're trying to look after has. And that's quite a small but really, really important inversion of the normal way of looking at the operations of a company and how people experience work, where we build stuff, we do things, we offer services, we're here to do compliance, and that's very solution focused. And very often there's a mismatch between what people actually want and need and desire in their life and in their career and what we think they want. And so people experience as a product is ultimately just this fancy way of saying, thinking about the experience of work as something that people subscribe to with their time, their talent, their energy, their effort, discretionary or otherwise. And in return, they receive value. And that value might be a paycheck, but very quickly, I think there are lots of people on earth who maybe don't necessarily need a paycheck, but they still work, right? Work is a fundamental element of the human existence, I think. And so what else do people get? They get meaning, they get a social kind of component to their role. They get progression, this feeling of growth and development and the desire to kind of come back, energy, right? When it's going well. And when it's not going well, you don't get those things. And the theory is that this is not just a kind of people-centric view of the world. It's also a highly kind of commercially rigorous idea, because when you have a bunch of people who are highly energized around what they're doing every day, you generally get kind of outperformance from a commercial perspective too. So we take all of the same ideas that some of the best companies on earth use to build great products, and we apply that exact same rigor to what is one of the most important experiences in someone's life, which is the experience of work. So that's what PX as a product means. People experience as a product is just another way of saying work as a product. And we're starting to see a lot of companies around the world really start to lean into this and kind of apply these principles at scale.
Yeah, and I know you've just been working with a very innovative, incredible, and large organization to apply the principle. Can you tell us a little bit about what their problem or need or desire was, and, on the approach you took and what the outcomes
Yeah.
were?
Sure. So we might refer to this company euphemistically, a very large multinational consumer intelligence company, about 95 countries, 40 odd thousand employees, and lots of commercial context, which we could go into. But basically, relative to their competitors in that space, the kind of revenue per employee numbers is very high in their competitors relative to them. And so they're looking at their company, how they operate, how they can transform, and how they can use technology to become a more efficient and effective and profitable business. So one of the decisions that they made early on was to go with Workday, and they did a very incredible bit of work really to globally roll Workday out in about 8 months, which honestly is phenomenal. And about a year later, they brought me in just to take a look. And generally what they were sensing was that employees were finding the technology fine, managers as well, but the HR folks themselves were really struggling or finding that adaptation to be challenging in various ways. And so, long story short, kind of realized pretty quickly that they didn't have a technology problem. In fact, they were, using some of the best available technology that was available on the market. And what I kind of diagnosed was a bit of a work design problem. And so, what had happened really, if we just zoom out a little, is they'd brought this technology, which is highly configurable, highly adaptable in, and because we're operating at speed, just naturally a bunch of things got deprioritized, or they didn't kind of go into the level of standardization, the designing of work in that way. So what we decided to do was actually do a work study. And so we talked to some of our favorite people at Beamable about kind of helping us with that. And really what we wanted to deeply understand before we went and looked at the technology was to try and figure out what work is actually being done, by whom, I guess, not necessarily on an individual level, but kind of on a functional or team level, so that we could take a look at where that work should actually sit, what work needed to stay local, if some work needed to actually continue to be done in a physical location, whereas other work could perhaps be done anywhere. And then most importantly, where did we find inefficiency or friction that people were experiencing day to day, and what work did people love doing? And the idea was that if we could maximize the amount of time that people were spending doing work that they love and work that was actually really critical for the company, and maybe then look at the work that was neither of those things, we could start to look at different solutions to take away the friction, take away the drudgery, take away some of that lower value stuff. And if it was also stuff that people didn't like doing, well, that's a win-win for everybody. And so the work study was phenomenal. It gave us an incredible, rich data set. We could see the work really. The work was visible, legible, and really that moved what was previously a bit of a I wouldn't say emotive conversation, but it was one where there was a lot of opinions. We really had a kind of shared data set, which was kind of shared evidence. And it has now formed the basis of the next year or two worth of the kind of transformation program. So basically, instead of thinking about the solution, which was the technology, we had to go back to first principles and diagnose the problem at its core. And once we started interrogating what we could see, we were then able to start identifying problems to solve with the idea of heading towards a particular direction.
And tell me, with the idea of work as a product, were you thinking about work as a product for the people within this function, or were you thinking about the function being a product for people who work within the rest of the organization?
Yeah, I love this question. There's something that I observe a lot when we bring this idea to HR folks. It's often quite a simple process to internalize. Oh, I start to understand it, right? The subscription idea, the experience idea. So I'll just take a look at what I already have. And instead of thinking about that as perhaps a COE or a project or an initiative, I can just use the word product now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we love the intent. We kind of acknowledge the good faith and good intent, but we also want to kind of stop that impulse a little bit. And there's a very small but very important inversion that's required, which is a product manager does not start from what you have as a solution. We don't start with a solution and say, this is the product. We start from the problem that we're trying to solve. And the solution is an emergent property of a deep understanding of the problem and a set of discovery processes where we experiment to figure out the right way to solve it. And so when we go into a business, we don't often talk about what they have. We start to try and get deeper into what the company is actually trying to become. Because in order to figure out what our products are, we need to understand where the business is trying to get to, number one. Number two, what are the things that are currently like in the way of that? And generally we create what we call problem spaces. And those problem spaces are kind of playgrounds within which we empower teams, small cross-functional teams, to go and discover and solve problems. And products emerge from that process. And so it's a big leap, but we kind of have to abandon a lot of what the traditional HR structures force us into. So we see traditional centers of excellence, rewards, talent, what's another one? Learning, and we say, okay, cool. Well, we've always done this thing, so now we'll continue to do that thing, and we'll call that a product. And very often, a product might need to have a piece of learning, a piece of talent, a piece of these. And so we really need to abandon the shape and structure of our org chart and think about who we're solving for, what their pains, needs, and desires are. And most importantly, what are the most important employee problems when solved consistently, reliably, repeatedly lead to business value? That's the two things. And I guess if I was to make one point here, we're looking to solve for both employee value, customer value, and business value. Those two things need to be front and center, and we can't solve one over the other. There is no kind of winner. They're not mutually exclusive.
And to me, that seems like that's why it emerged as a work design problem, because obviously you're looking at how is work done today and how can work better generate outcomes for the business, but also outcomes for individuals as well. Is that
100%.
right?
Everything in this space, ultimately, when we start to apply this lens, becomes a work design problem. So work as a product changes it from this idea of we have people problems or people challenges or people initiatives or people investments into a set of conversations around the work that occurs here in the system of work inside this commercial entity. And it switches that to becoming a design challenge. And a design, there is a whole industry around design and design and innovation. And it's a phenomenally empowering and energizing mental switch, because a lot of HR folks, I think, traditionally carry this feeling of compliance or admin or cost as a cost to be minimized. And when you invert that, you become an innovation engine, you become a growth driver, but it forces you to learn and lean into a whole bunch of new skills, which are what are we actually trying to do in the company? And how efficiently and effectively and are we able to achieve that right now? And what's getting in the way? And a lot of HR folks talk about wanting a seat at the table. Showing up with this type of language, this type of pose is the way that you get a seat at the table, when you can talk about bottom line impact or, revenue growth or profit as a result of optimizing the system of work.
Brilliant. And could you give us one or two anecdotes about what came out of it when you then you did your discovery and diagnostics and you got all of that rich data? What's an example of a product maybe that came out of that at the end?
Yeah. So I think I might use a different company for this example, but there's all sorts of different ways. There's something that we observe is, because traditional HR has often had, there are these 5 or 6 centers of excellence. Therefore, there must now be a single transferable set of products which are applicable across companies. We don't see that. Every single business has a unique set of contexts and experiences and problems that are happening in their companies. And so, working with companies to identify the problem spaces, we see a bunch of different things emerge. So some companies go down the path of the the dimensions of experience. So one that we're working with is looking at who I work with as a problem to solve. Right. So that's the fabric of the social and human interactions. That's the relationship with your manager, the relationship with your team. It's all of the talent acquisition stuff, what I do when I'm here. So that's very much a work design challenge, the role design, the org structure, the career path, where and when. So whether you're a hybrid or fully remote or fully in person, and when goes as much to like the cadence of work. So whether you're shift patterns or, time zones, all of that kind of stuff. Why? Which is the connection to purpose, the company strategy, the way we communicate internally, and how. And a lot of that goes to the tooling, the way we do meetings, the way we make decisions, the way we do projects, the way we fund different things. So each of those are seen as individual problem spaces. A different company has gone down the path of, I guess, things which are very specific to their commercial objectives to grow. They have a significant market opportunity, an online company here in Europe. And they're looking at problem spaces which sound like work and employment. So work very much goes to making it easier for people to get things done. Employment goes to the administration of the basics of their employment. We have one around growth. We have one around leadership, we have one around talent, and we have one around insights. And each of those particular challenges are directly linked to their overall business strategy. And if we solve problems well in those spaces, we will start to remove some of the impediments that are, or accelerate our progress towards our overall business objectives. So those are just a couple of examples.
Amazing. Thanks. So I can imagine that as you're thinking about better work design and better experiences for people and more efficient delivery, that AI is coming up a lot. How does that, how is that playing into the conversation or decisions or the way that products are developed?
Yeah. It's so hot right now. It's the thing which is at the core of every conversation, as you say. I'm not an AI guy in as much as I don't spend all of my time thinking about it. I tend to take a very pragmatic position and perhaps like trying to see what is happening as a similar cycle to what we've experienced in the past with other major technological changes. So the most recent comparison, I think, is probably the internet economy, late 90s, early 2000s, and there was a very frothy bubble. There was a whole bunch of excitement. There was a whole lot of elevated stock prices and all sorts of conversations around how the whole world was going to change. And then there was an overvaluation and a correction. And I think we're probably going to see something like that. And then on the other side of that event, there will be an emergent set of winners and a set of technologies and whatever emerges out of that post-market correction. I think that'll be the thing that we'll start to get a little bit more clarity around. And so when that happens, no idea, but like I think it's kind of inevitable. That's thing number one. Thing number two is it's the technology itself for me is going to become a utility. Everyone will have AI. At the moment, some teams, some companies, some people are early adopters and are moving ahead and are kind of bringing this new tool into their life. After a long enough period of time, everyone's going to be literate in this way. And so the things that are true today are not necessarily true in a couple of years, because there will be, I think, just a commoditization of this technology. Everyone will be good at execution. Everyone will have augmented assistance and in productivity and efficiency. So the things that people are focusing on right now are completely wrong-headed, in my view. A lot of the conversations around cost out, it's around kind of just the worst extractive parts of capitalism, I think we're seeing kind of play out. It's kind of a sad, but unfortunately a prevalent kind of component of our economy. So again, I think a lot of that's short-sighted. A lot of that is probably making decisions that are probably unsustainable for companies in the long run. If you're removing a lot of opportunity for the top end of the talent funnel, that there's a mathematical limitation to how much runway your company's going to have. So I think what's going to happen longer term is everyone will have access to these tools. Everyone will be able to execute. So what you are executing on becomes the differentiator. So that comes back to humanity. It comes back to judgment. It comes back to the very human part of what it means to kind of go to work and to do creative and innovative things. And that really energizes me. I think that AI inevitably will change the very nature of work. Similarly, this whole idea of product didn't exist in the same way that it does today in the 90s. It's a role and a job that emerged out of that technological innovation of the internet economy. And so we're going to see all sorts of new jobs that will emerge. I think the job paradigm moves a lot slower than the AI paradigm is. And AI does not correlate to jobs, in my view, meaning, this job can be done by this agent. I think what is actually true is components of this job at the task level can be performed by one or more of these agents. And so there's going to be a period of time where we start to see work being broken down into a much more elemental pieces so that we can assign the appropriate agent, be that a human or a machine, to do that work. And what I hope that we see on the other side of that is kind of human flourishing to kind of come out, where we start to see humans holding on to the very human things that make the human experience what it is: creativity, joy, innovation. The relentless scales of commercial innovation are going to force that stuff to happen, and maybe some of the drudgery over time will perhaps be able to be handled. So just to kind of sum that up, I think that work is changing at the task level, but we're having conversations around the impact at the job level. And I think they're very different things. Jobs, pay structures, org structures, they take years to kind of change. They're lagging, whereas tasks are changing all the time. You'll see quite uneven allocations of this technology inside companies too. So the marketing team are running ahead doing this thing, and the financial team are doing something else. And I think that really does prompt a conversation internally around designing work as an intentional and created and designed thing, rather than allowing just this kind of chaos to kind of unfold. I think that kind of reinforces the point even more.
Yep. Love that work. And, that's a lot of the work that we're doing, obviously, with you and others, which is very exciting. And I love that word you used, elemental, breaking it down to its elements, and then looking at what are the elements that are energizing, what are the elements that are creating value, what are the elements best done by humans, and where that, creativity and judgment and everything else is required. So, yeah, well said.
Thank you.
Okay. So what would be, given all of your experience and with that PX as a product or work as a product lens, what advice would you have for HR leaders? What kind of problems would they be encountering that you would say, here's a path to take? Or anyway, sorry, what's your advice?
Well, I'm very lucky to have some coaching clients that I work with, and I think the conversation that I have in those part of those relationships is about moving away from traditional HR and beginning to intentionally inhabit a space where the people function is the R&D and go-to-market function for the product of work. So a product manager is accountable to an R&D function inside a company, and the go-to-market function inside a company, and then the customer base outside of the company for definition, alignment, and I guess the process of energizing each of those three groups around a bunch of different questions. One of which is what we're going to build. And so what does it mean to work here, and what are the things that we're going to create that are going to make that experience of work good for people and the company? Next one is where to play. So what markets, what user groups, what countries, what segments are we going to target and why? And then the third one is how to win, which is a repeatable and scalable path to adoption of your product, which leads to sustainable and differentiated medium to long-term business results. So that completely changes the mindset away from compliance, employee relations. I mean, all of these things will still have to be handled, right? But that is not your core function. Your core function is to create value for people and the company. So that's the primary thing. It's just that R&D and go-to-market function for work. And then I think as a follow-on, when the rubber meets the road, when we start to dig into that, I often get a question along the lines of like, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? And so the first question I always have is, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and how will you know? What signals from the world will you detect that will give you the sense that you're heading in the right direction? And so I have kind of a coaching question. I can't claim that it's original, but I read it somewhere, which is, would you bet or gamble an uncomfortable amount of your own money on this thing, turning out the way that you want it to, is the first question. And then the second thing is, and if you did decide to do that, how would an impartial, disconnected, dispassionate third-party observer referee whether you won the bet or not? And so I think in the first question, we're not actually asking you to gamble your own money or invest your own money. But if you get a little bit of a spidey sense tingle that you have some uncertainty around that, that's signal, and it probably prompts a little bit more thought. And then the second thing is, if you cannot describe to someone who has no context around what it is that you're trying to do, whether you have achieved it or not, in terms of measurable, as commercial as possible results, we're probably not in the right place to go invest the company's time and money in a thing that we're not sure about. So if we can get tight on those two things, it generally is a signal that we have a pretty firm understanding of the problem, and why this problem and why now, and how our solution is going to, that our level of confidence in the solution is going to result in the impact and the outcomes that we're trying to drive.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. They're very uncomfortable questions, but I'm going to try using them next time I've got a decision to
I'll
make.
send you an invoice.
Yep. Okay. Chris, I have got one more question, and then I'll open it to if there's anything else you want to share. But I would love to know, you're obviously very passionate about the work that you do, but on a day-to-day basis, when you're working with these organizations to help them in their transformation journey or to solve these problems, what energizes you most?
Yeah. Did you read the Simon Sinek book, Start With Why?
Yep.
Yeah, I did that, and I'm going to try and bring it up here in the background because I think this is ultimately the answer to the question. I basically spend my days trying to make sense of things, and I get a lot of energy from solving a puzzle, I think, which is ultimately a process of taking something that's quite complex and then turning that into an idea, a framework, I guess a tool that others can use to help them grow and help them flourish, so that they can utilize that for the same kind of outcome, I guess. I'm kind of a values-led person. I'm very much focused on building a life which is in service of, I guess, my personal mission, which is a calm mind, a healthy body, and a house full of love. So everything I'm doing in my business and in my work, I think, is ultimately in service of that higher order objective. And the Simon Sinek book, Start With Why, really helped me to detach myself from how I get there and to focus very much on where it is that I'm trying to get to and what are the things that help me feel energized during my day. And then what that does is it opens up an infinite world of opportunity and possibility to create and chase opportunities that are aligned with that sense of purpose. So I guess at its most simplistic, it's something about coherence and clarity and puzzle solving. In a more intellectualized version, it's, like I said, making sense of complexity.
Well, I am sure that anyone who listens to this sort of point of view by Chris Metcalfe will be very energized, and I guess a whole new world of what's possible and how they could be thinking about their problems. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. All right.
Okay.
That was all right, was it?